Homelessness Prevention will come to order. A quorum is present. Up first today, we have Senate File 4400 with Senator Mohamed. Senator Mohamed, go ahead and present your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, as this committee discusses regularly, Minnesota has a crisis of affordable housing, from rentals to houses for sale, upkeep to new construction. We should use every tool at our disposal, tap every revenue stream to encourage and facilitate the creation of affordable housing. I think the description of Senate File 4400 speaks for itself. Aggregate bond limitation reduction applicable to the allocation of private activity bonds for qualifying residential rental projects. Got it? I admit it's not the easiest thing to put into words, so here's a simpler explanation. This bill would leverage public and private investment that will expand affordable housing in Minnesota. And without spending a dollar of the state budget, I bet I got your attention now. This legislation takes advantage of everybody loves money, right? This legislation takes advantage of the tax code on low-income housing tax credits to incentivize new projects in every community of our state. That's why it has the support of the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, the Minnesota Family Housing Fund, the Minnesota Housing Partnership, the Minnesota Housing Stability Coalition, and the Twin Cities Housing Alliance. The common sense math behind this change has already been done by the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, the cities of the City of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Dakota County. 23 other states have already passed this legislation or something similar to it, and we should start moving to be the 24th. We will solve our housing affordability crisis with an all-of-the-above approach and should not hesitate at the chance to leverage federal and private money to help Minnesotans. That is all I have as far as testimony, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Mohamed. We'll move to testifiers. Andrea Brennan and Mary Tingerthal, former commissioner. If you guys would come on up, please just introduce yourself with your full name before you present your testimony, and you can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Andrea Brennan, President and CEO of the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund. GMHF is a nonprofit housing intermediary, and we are Minnesota's largest housing-focused community development financial institution, or CDFI. GMHF supports the entire continuum of affordable and workforce housing needs throughout the state of Minnesota, serving all 87 counties. I'm here to testify in favor of Senate File number 4400, and as Senator Mohamed said, it's very straightforward and not at all complicated. The Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program was created by the Tax Reform Act of 1986. It was, and it has been since that time, the primary tool for creating affordable housing in the United States. Over the first 40 years of the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, almost 4 million units of affordable housing have been produced or preserved using the program nationally in the United States. In July of 2025, Congress passed H.R. 1, which amended Internal Revenue Code Section 42 to include several significant changes to provisions that govern the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. This program allocates credits to states in two different ways. First, the 9% low-income housing tax credit, which typically funds or can fund up to 70% of a project's costs, are the most valuable and competitive. These 9% credits are allocated on a competitive basis to projects through Minnesota Housing and other allocating agencies in Minnesota. The second form is the one we're talking about today, and that is the 4% low-income housing tax credit. This credit can fund up to 30% of a project's costs. They are not allocated on a competitive basis. Rather, they are accessed by a project when the project is awarded tax-exempt private activity bonds and the project meets the financed by test. The and the finance by test is one of the changes that occurred through HR 1. The amount of 4% low-income housing tax credits, the amount is not capped, but the amount of tax-exempt private activity bonds are capped. They are allocated to each state based on the state's population. The federal changes in HR 1 increased the 9% tax credit amount by 12% and lowered the finance by test for 4% tax credits. Previously, 50% of a project's basis cost had to be financed with tax-exempt bond proceeds to receive an award of these 4% low-income housing tax credits. HR 1 reduced this finance by test to 25%. This means that fewer tax-exempt bonds can be allocated to more projects, which in turn can increase the amount of the 4% tax credit equity raised for affordable housing projects in Minnesota. Nationally, bipartisan estimates of the impact of these changes could result in the production of an additional 1.2 million homes over the next decade nationwide. So I think now I can turn it over to Mary Tinkerthal to give it a concrete example using actual numbers.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Tinkerthal, and I'm here today working with Greater Minnesota Housing Fund and the Housing Stability Coalition. As I was thinking about how to understand this, I thought perhaps an example would be helpful. For a housing development project, this is a rental housing development project that costs $40 million. A developer can get 4% tax credits worth $1.6 million per year, or $16 million over the 10 years that the credit's available to them. Multiplied by the typical current price that investors pay for credits of 82 cents, that brings in, for that one project, $13 million worth of equity from investors. So that's the dollars coming in from the tax credits. Under the old rules, the developer would typically request 55% of their cost in private activity bonds, or $22 million in bonds. Under the proposed change to state law under 4400, the developer could still obtain the 4% tax credits under one of the two following scenarios. They could request between 25 and 30% of the cost, or $12 million if it was 30%, if their project was not going to use the tax-exempt bonds for their long-term financing. Or if they did plan to use the bonds for their long-term financing, they could request up to 40% of the cost, or $16 million worth of bonds. In both cases, even with those lower dollar amounts of bonds, they would still be eligible to get the full $16 million worth of tax credits over the 10 years, or $13 million in equity. Assuming for Minnesota an average project size of $40 million, and assuming that the typical amount of bonds that gets allocated by MMB every year at $350 million, and we'll assume that half the projects ask for 30%, ask for 40%. We would increase the number of projects we could do in a given year, each year, from 16 projects to 25 projects. So 9 more projects in Minnesota, even under those fairly conservative estimates. That would bring in an additional, each year, $118 million worth of equity that would not otherwise be available to us. And the math there is 9 additional projects times the 13.12 in equity. So that is the magic that Senator Mohamed was talking about, that without spending $1 of state money, we can, by making this change, have the opportunity to bring in $118 million worth of private equity driven by federal tax credits into the state each year.
Thank you so much. Members, fully understand it now? Questions, amendments? Senator Draheim.
Thank you. And I just would like to get confirmation from nonpartisan staff that the fiscal impact to the state would be zero.
Mr. Olson.
Madam Chair, Senator Draheim, fiscal note has been requested, but it's not currently completed yet, so I can't speak to the fiscal impact yet.
I will say also, Senator Draheim, that the primary jurisdiction of this is finance, so we will be sending it to finance.
That was my next question, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Grunhagen and then Senator Lucero.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. So if I'm understanding this right, the private equity side, they're getting the tax credits. So these are high worth investors who are willing to advance some money into these projects, building projects, to get these tax credits. Is that correct?
Ms. Tingerthal?
Madam Chair, Senator Grunhagen, typically the investors tend to be institutional investors, such as banks, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and oftentimes insurance companies. So they tend to be large corporate investors rather than individual investors. And this is a program that has been financing the majority of housing development in the U.S. for the last 40 years.
Okay.
Senator Grunhagen?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks. So basically, these banks and insurance companies, they're using this tax credit to offset their tax liability in exchange for investing into these projects.
Ms. Tingerthal?
Madam Chair, Senator Grunhagen, yes, that is correct. And in exchange for these tax credits, they commit to caps on the rents of the apartments that they build for a period initially of 15 years and then extended to 30 years. So that's the exchange. That's the value that the federal government gets in return for providing the tax credits.
Senator Grunhagen?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for that. So it can go to 30 years, the cap? Did I understand that correctly?
Madam Chair, Senator Grunhagen, yes, that is the typical amount of time that the investors agree to keep the projects affordable. So they agree that they'll calculate their rents. They're allowed to increase them every year because it's based on the area median income.
Oh,
so
okay.
they calculate a % of the area median income. So it's not like they're capped at today's numbers and they can't change them. They are allowed to be adjusted every year.
Yeah, I would just
Senator Grunhagen?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I would say there had to be a safety valve there for costs because, I mean, you can't just put a flat cap on there for 30 years. I don't know who would find that attractive. Anyway, I'm starting to get my head wrapped around it, I think. So thanks for your explanation.
Senator Lucero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And on that line of questioning, what is, you said it can be adjusted annually based on the area median income. What does that translate to as a year-over-year average rate increase, maybe over the last, I was going to say, what would be a normal year that's before COVID or?
Ms. Brennan?
Sure. Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, typically the projections on these projects assume a higher rate of annual increase in costs versus annual increase in revenue, which would be rent. So typically those estimates can anywhere be from assuming 3% annual increase in expenses versus 2% annual increase in revenue. I believe that again, the area median income, the actual increase depends on how that changes year over year. but I believe it has been less than 3% on average over the last number of years.
Senator Lucero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then a couple more questions here. So I'm trying to figure out how to ask the question. So when it comes to these credits, and this will not be an easy question to answer, but to the degree that you can. So when factoring in the front, I'm guessing the credits are front loaded, they're not spread out over the life of the life of the asset. Okay, so they're front loaded. And then the rate of increase might be 3-ish% per year, obviously adjusted based on what's happening with the area median incomes in a given year over year. But what would you say, I'm trying to think how to ask it, would be the profit, maybe per unit, if you could divide it by that?
Ms. Brennan?
Yeah, sure. Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, the way that in the example that Ms. Tinkerthal gave, I'll maybe refer to that, the tax credits are allocated to the tax credit investor. And so I think in that example, it was, let's say 16 million in tax credits that are that are allocated to, or let's use an easier number of 10 million, because that's divided easily by 10. So then the investor claims those credits, like the 1 million a year over 10 years. So that is a dollar for dollar reduction in federal tax liability that the investor claims. So that is a clear sort of, math there. And then there's a sort of a present value discount that happens up front. So the price that the investor pays the developer essentially, or meaning the amount of equity that they contribute to develop the project, is discounted based on that time value of money, based on the fact that that credit is taken over 10 years. So the example that Ms. Tinkerthal used was 82 cents. So for that dollar, the amount is that, it's that 16 million basically multiplied by, or divided by, it's 82% of that. And so the amount upfront in the project is cents on that dollar based on the current market price of tax credits. So there's an entire sort of industry of tax credit investors. As Ms. Tinkerthal noted, it tends to be institutional investors, the GSEs like Freddie and Fannie, insurance companies, et cetera. And so there's a market of investors that are out there, and what they determine the price to be is based on, it's a bit of a supply demand, but it's also based on the particular the particular risk profile of that project. Does that answer your question?
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It does give insight. I appreciate that. So the next question would be, for these institutional investors, insurance companies, et cetera, it sounds like it's an industry. In fact, that's what you just said. It's an industry that is doing this. After the project is built, are these investors who are building the projects, do they typically retain them over the life of the asset? Or are those terms and conditions which are locked in on that project, are they then, after the build, typically transferred over to a different category of investor for the life then of the home?
Ms. Brennan.
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, the tax credit investor, as I mentioned, the benefit to them is over a 10-year period. The recapture period is 15 years. What that means is that if during the first 15 years, the project does not comply with the income and the rent requirements, then the IRS essentially could recapture those tax credits from the investor. So their benefit period is 10 years, but they are subject to recapture from the IRS if the project does not meet the requirements for that 15-year period. And so during that 15-year period, the investor is typically a 99% owner of that project, and most investors typically exit that ownership structure after the 15 years. Now, there is another, the 1% owner is tends to be the general partner, who we think of as the developer, the owner operator of this housing. And they still have another 15 years of affordability that they have to comply with. And that affordability is monitored and enforced by the Minnesota allocating agency, who allocates those low-income housing, those 4% low-income housing tax credits. So that could be Minnesota Housing, or that could be one of the other locally designated tax credit suballocator agencies.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. This is definitely insightful. So when I'm working on a bill that's not related to this, but it's related to putting some limitations based on the houses that they can own, et cetera, et cetera. So, Madam Chair and Senator Mohamed, given that these are tax dollars and tax credits and the profits are going to these institutional investors, do you have any concerns that you are expanding this program and potentially lining the pockets of big business, corporate entities, national companies, these agencies, or not agencies, insurance companies, et cetera? Are you concerned with profits flowing to such organizations?
Senator Mohamed, Ms. Brennan.
Wow, I've never been asked that question, so I appreciate it. I mean, I think the goal of it is to go to, not to those folks who actually need this. We're gonna build affordable housing in our communities, and so it's something I'm thinking about, and if you wanna work on that together, happy to.
Ms. Brennan?
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, the benefit that the tax credit investor is getting from the federal government is that dollar for dollar reduction in their federal tax credit, or their tax liability. And so typically the way that the exit is structured is that they exit that partnership without any further financial benefit. So there are some instances where, for example, they have a negative capital account that needs to be made right so that they don't have further tax liability. But the benefit from the tax credit investor is just the tax credit. It is typically not, not any of the actual like appreciation in value or, proceeds of sale or that type of thing. So and I think that that's a difference in the example that was referenced, in that they're not, the investment is not intended to, to be, have a return that includes like appreciation and benefiting from that appreciation over time.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just one last question, and I appreciate that, but the reason I was asking is sometimes, well, not sometimes, oftentimes in this committee and others on different proposals and legislation, there's a tax on profitability, there's a tax on, not a tax, there are those that attack free market economics, they attack those that have rates of return and profit. And I'm just wondering if there was, and hence the motivation for the question, if there was some mental gymnastics going on here, because often the rhetoric is attacking those who are making money. And then here we have a bill that's actually incentivizing by giving tax dollars for the purposes of a profit. But the next question I would have is, and I've been around the legislature now for many years, and whenever I see proposals that come before us on something that was codified in law years ago, and there's a bill coming forward to change, I always ask the question, why the original whatever it is put into place? So, Madam Chair, can there be any insight by the testifiers or the bill author, why the original 55 that is being crossed out? What were the conversations that took place? Why that? And what are the potential consequences now that may have existed then that we're now seeking to change that we should consider?
Ms. Brennan?
Madam Chair, Senator Lucero, this the same rationale applies to this proposed SF 4400 as it did to the change in 2018 that is in 474 that established the 55% cap on the maximum bond limitation. And the rationale at that time in 2018 was to recognize that at that time under federal law, the financed by test was 50%. So 50% of a project's costs needed to be financed by tax-exempt bond proceeds in order to be eligible for these 4% low-income housing tax credits. So because of that, 474A established the maximum amount of bonds that could be allocated at that 50% test plus 5% to allow for some cushion because, it's hard to hit that percentage exactly on the dot. So the 55% represents the minimum required under federal law plus a 5% cushion. The proposed change in Senate File 4400 uses the same rationale and looks at the 25% finance by test, which is current federal law, and takes that 25% and adds that 5% cushion to get you to 30%. The difference here is that in evaluating whether we could just literally swap out the 55% for the 30% to be exact apples to apples, part of our due diligence was talking with all of the bond users, so the for-profit and the nonprofit developers of affordable housing in the state of Minnesota that use this tool. And what we learned is that many of them use these tax-exempt bond proceeds to basically fund their permanent first mortgage that supports the property. And it would be a feasibility concern for some of these developers if the cap was at 30%, because often their permanent debt is something more than 30%. We learned that a lot of them have permanent debt that is in that 30 to 40% range. And so that's why the proposal before you said, or the bill language includes the greater of. So 30% of reasonably expected aggregate basis or maximum permanent supportable debt subject to a cap. Because if it's not subject to a cap, then we could still get to, allocating 55%, which means we're not making most efficient use of this tool and maximizing the federal allowed resources that we could get if we didn't cap it at something under than what it currently is, which is 55%. And I would add too that in the robust discussions we had with the developers or the users of this tool, we learned there's broad consensus for these changes. And because after Minnesota Management and Budget took in their first round of applications in January for the housing pool, they were oversubscribed in the first round, and there's currently 11 projects that are on their priority list or waiting list. And the total amount of those 11 projects are asking for $260 million. So there is a significant amount of demand for this resource in Minnesota. And if that percentage were dropped from 55% to 40%, more of these projects could get funded.
Senator Lucero. Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Mohamed, for bringing the bill forward. And I just wanted to make a few comments. I think it's always interesting to hear how you put together a project. And the number one obstacle normally is financing. And we've been screaming housing units, housing units, housing units for a long time. And of course, I'm a broken record, especially on that pathway to home ownership. Would I love to see this type of investment on single-family homes? Definitely. It's just not practical with this structure. there is some creative ways I wish the federal government would look at it to build houses instead of what we're doing with this project, but it is still housing units. And so I appreciate the bill. I understand a little bit of the financing piece of it. We are in such a need for more housing units. I hope everybody will support this. You know, the targets, I don't know if there will be any cost. I would be shocked. I don't think there is anything that's tied to this, but I just wanted to say that I do support this. It isn't my first choice, but it is housing units, and we desperately need more housing units. So that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Senator Abler.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry I was late. I read the title of this bill and I thought, oh, that's something to tangle up the students in the audience. But I'm kind of getting the idea as I listened and read some of the background. The point of this is to dilute the funding so you can buy more places, basically. I have a question, two questions, which might well have exhausted what I understand about the bill. It's still kind of a rookie here, but second-year rookie. Every day I have less confidence in big developers and private equity companies, and they're not going away, and so I don't have an amendment, we just came from the mobile home press conference thing, and so I'm kind of ginned up about that, which we've talked about, which is not part of this. But so is there some way that a small developer, let's say a company that builds 10 houses a year, could get into this thing and serve in a small way? And that might even go further? That's my question.
Senator Mohamed?
I can start. I think I'll talk about what I desire. For me, I would want that. So if it doesn't right now, we can look into language that does that, but I'll let Andrea or...
Ms. Tingerthal?
Yes, Madam Chair and Senator Abler. What I would say is that the priorities that are set out in the rest of 474A give priority for refinancing projects that have federal subsidies in them. That's been in place, I believe, since 474A was adopted. It then gives the next preference for those projects that are targeted for affordability at 50% of median income. And then the third priority is projects that are 100% low-income housing tax credit units, but without the targeting to 50%. That said, there are no limitations other than perhaps practical ones for a small developer to be able to utilize this tool. The practical one that I mentioned is that there are costs incurred when you issue tax-exempt bonds. And so to the extent that a smaller developer might team up with a larger developer, might team up with a city to be able to do a smaller project, that might make the bonding approach more feasible. Many of those developers do score fairly well for the allocation of resources at the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. So there's nothing to prohibit a small developer, but practically speaking, it might not be their first choice for where to apply for financing.
Senator Abler.
Madam Chair, I appreciate that. So, I mean, there's not an infinite amount of money for housing. You knew that, I think. We all agree about that. And I just don't think that we're pushing hard enough on ways to maximize what we get and how to keep housing prices low. And I presume this is an array of different kinds of projects. And I've been particularly unhappy with Dominium and how they treated my locals, which took advantage of something like this. And I just wonder about even and I'm not going to go on, but just about the policy about where refinancing somebody who's got their oar in the water is a priority. Do they have to do another 15-year deal of providing the low-income stuff? Or those kind of things, maybe that's a rhetorical thing. You don't have to answer. I don't want to tie up the whole committee with this, but it just makes me kind of wonder. And I would, let's say we give some state or federal money, I'll just give one example, to some builder, and then they get to go sell it for whatever they want. I think we should let them build it, and then they can have a profit margin of 5 or 10%, and then sell it for not more than what their hard costs are into it. That would actually drive the cost below. And actually, there's plenty of little builders that would get it that think that'd be great. They can hire their, they have workers, and it would truly make a dent. Just a thought about that. The final question is, why don't they, who gets the appreciation then when this thing finally sells in the future? And depreciation and all that.
Ms. Tingerthal?
Madam Chair and Senator Abler, what I would say is that each of these transactions is structured differently in terms of what benefits go to the equity investors. So it would be hard to generalize as to what the path is for all of the tax benefits that are structured into the transaction.
Well, Madam Chair, somebody said that they only get the tax benefits, they don't get the appreciation. So I just don't, well, where does it go? That's all. Who gets, so a company can take advantage of this program in the present sense or the future version, and they buy a place and they find they want to sell my place in Coon Rapids to somebody else. They're going to make a profit, right? Hey, that's all. They can't do that. That's all.
Ms. Brennan?
Sure, Madam Chair and Senator Abler. Because the tax credit investor typically exits after year 15, after they are no longer subject to recapture from the IRS, they typically exit the partnership, but there's another 15 years of affordability. And so because of the additional 15 years of affordable restrictions, there isn't, the value of the property is limited to basically the amount of, when you look at the income method of valuation, the income is limited because of the rent restrictions and because of the ongoing restrictions on the property. And so the typical scenario is that the investor exits the partnership and there isn't an event of, or if there is an event of sale, the sale has to go to somebody who's going to continue with those income restrictions. Therefore, the property is not generating the kind of income that would allow for there to be a lot of sort of net proceeds or equity in a transaction like that. And so it's just highly unlikely that investors are walking away with sales proceeds or representing appreciation after year 15. But it is they are structured as they are part owner of this project that they are investing in, and there are tax benefits and there are other benefits of ownership. But it's typically not the reason why they're investing, and it's typically not, doesn't result in those kinds of benefits at the end.
Senator Drahan?
If I could, to that point, Jim, the ones I've seen are barely breaking even.
Yeah.
So we're not talking probably the nicest units in town.
Yeah.
That normally if they try to sell before the end of the period, it's really affordable to buy, but it's hard to break even or to make a profit. So it's pretty much flat, what I would call it's a flat investment. There's no upside through that 30-year period is my experience. So.
Yeah. Oh, fine, that's it's interesting and I appreciate it, but just back to my other point, we spend all our time talking, we need more buildings and so on, and so I just think, with all respect to capitalism, cutting out the middle person's profit, to build these things on the front end would make all the sense in the world. And wouldn't it be nice if you have a bunch of small builders who are New Americans, or my little local guy up in Anoka that builds several houses a year? It'd be a little more complicated, but I think it's just a policy thing. Thanks for bearing with me, Madam Chair.
Of course, Senator Abler.
Madam Chair.
Senator Mohamed.
Senator Abel, I'm going to bring you an application to sign up for DSA this week.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I wasn't going to ask that, but to that comment, going back to my earlier question, this bill then is advancing taxpayer dollars and tax credits to institutional investors. Does the DSA support that? Because that's what's happening here.
Wow, that's a great question. I will say we talk a lot about housing in this committee. And what we know is that we have an affordability crisis when it comes to housing, which means the government can't right now fix it by itself. In order for us to build more housing, Senator Draham said this, the biggest barrier is financing. This is one of those moments where we're using a tool in our toolbox to open something so that we can build more housing in our community. It's not a political thing. It's not a left or right issue. It's simply how can we get more houses to be built in our communities, and we're making sure the opportunity is created here.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To my question, but before that, so essentially what's happening then is we're setting aside the principles of the DSA for purposes of allowing the free market to flow, because the DSA is a hindrance to building more housing, is what I'm hearing. But I'll move on. The question is, based on the conversation of what we just heard between Senator Abler and Draham, I'm concerned about with the limitations there and the challenges to make a profit. So at the end of 15 or 30 years, are there concerns then that because of the lack of potential cash flow, that there will be lack of maintenance that's occurred, and we're going to have bills before this committee, which we've heard, which are, there's a number of bills, whether they be senior buildings that have deferred maintenance, that we're going to have to require some government money to help the capitalization and improvements that are needed because of the deferred maintenance.
Senator Mohamed.
Madam Chair, I believe that people who build housing should upkeep the housing, and I think we should do everything in our power to help make sure that they build housing. When it comes to maintenance and maintaining a home, it is on the people who are supposed to be the management of those buildings that do it. I think I brought more bills than anyone else to make sure that we have actual laws that make sure that it's fair, that tenants have the same level of power as their landlords, and we should continue to do that and look into that.
Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In conclusion, on one condition, that DSA principles are set aside to make that happen. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Lucero. Senator Abler.
Yeah, just a little bit, and I appreciate the banter here. But I just am thinking, again, about some of my local builders. I think if you told some company, we can get you 40% of the money, would you put together a project in any of our towns? I think they go like, really? I can get 40%? They're struggling to get just first dollar, and we want them to be affordable. I just think we're missing something, not on going to the regular builder people and the institutional people. God bless them for pension funds or whatever they're doing. But I'm going to just continue provoking that thought as provoked by my colleague about the DSA bit. But just about, I don't know why that's a DSA thing at all. I think this is a practical thing. Thank you, Senator Lucero. But I wish that Minnesota Housing would do some of that looking into and drive policy to help get us truly accomplish the mission that you were after. So Senator Portu sold me on the vision, so I'm just helping out. Thank you.
Senator Mohamed, any closing comments?
My only closing comments are thank you for the thorough debate on this bill. I think I've sat in this committee for 4 years. And my goal is to always for us to build more housing, to make sure it's affordable, to make sure we take care of our tenants while they're housed. That continues to be my mission. It is why I have a constitutional amendment to put the power in the people's hands so that they can vote for us to build more housing and to continue to take care of those issues. This is one of those things where it's one tool in our toolbox where we're opening so that we can build more housing in our communities, and I appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Senator Mohamed. I think anytime we have a tool like this and we can expand its reach, that is a thing we should seriously consider. So I appreciate that. With that, Senator Mohamed moves Senate File 4400. Did we have an amendment? Okay. Be recommended to pass and referred to the Committee on Finance. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Your bill is on the way, Senator Mohamed. Thank you. 2 updates. I'm going to hand the gavel off to Senator Mohamed here in a moment, but did want to note for everyone that at 2 p.m. there are Shamrock Shakes in the vault. Senator Lucero's already dressed for it, but they're only there as long as they last. So first come, first serve. So, I'm just suggesting maybe we want to, I will pass the gavel off to Senator Mohamed, and we will move on to my bill.
All right, next bill on the agenda is Senate File 4394. Senator Port, to your bill.
Thank you very much. Chair Mohamed, if we can move first the A4, which is a technical amendment.
Okay, Senator Port moves her A4 amendment.
Senator Draheim has a question.
Senator Draheim, you have a question?
Yeah, I'd just like to hear from nonpartisan on the A4. Or on, is it really a technical cleanup? Is what it is? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, seeing no other questions, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposing say no. And the amendment is adopted. Senator Port.
Thank you. Then, Madam Chair, I have the A3 amendment.
Okay, Senator Port moves the A3 amendment. Should be in your packets.
And I can do a quick walkthrough of this. The A3 amendment, so this bill will be our omnibus policy bill as it moves out of committee. And this is the LAHA and SAHA changes, local housing aid and state affordable housing aid that we are hoping to advance in taxes. Taxes has asked us to add them in this committee so that they are engrossed in the bill when we send it to taxes next. And so the changes that exist in this amendment are to add emergency shelter construction to the allowable use. We've heard from several communities, including Lakeville in my area, would like to build an emergency shelter, and they have LAHA funds that they would like to use for that, but it's not currently an allowable use for that construction piece. So we're adding emergency shelter construction. We're also extending the timeline that municipalities have to use their housing aid by 2 years because we are also hearing like it's not enough to do a big project every year, and they want to have a few more years to collect the money together before investing in a project. And then finally, it has just a couple of technical edits for consistency that were suggested by tax counsel. Happy to answer questions on this.
Members, any questions for Senator Port? Seeing none, Senator Port moves the A3 amendment. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed and say nay. The amendment is adopted. Senator Port.
Thank you. And finally, Madam Chair, I have the A5 amendment.
All right, Senator Port moves the A5 amendment.
Madam Chair, this removes the repealer at the end of the agency bill. The statute that was the repealer is the study that we asked the agency to do last year to help us understand the total need in emergency rental assistance, what that looks like statewide, and to provide a report ongoing through that work. Since that time, the entity that had been doing the data, collecting the data on this, was defunded. So there's not currently an organization that collects that data. So the agency had asked for it to be repealed. I understand the concern there, and we got to figure out a way to collect the data. I would like to remove the repealer today because I would like us to keep talking about this and figure out if we can find another entity or if we can find some money to have the agency do this itself. I think it's really important information for us to have as a committee ongoing to understand what the need is across the state, but I also understand the challenges of it. So my ask is let's remove the repealer for today and see if we can keep working to find either an entity or some money to fund this before we move this to the floor.
Members, any, Senator Graham?
Thank you, Chair. Senator Port, the funding, was that, the report was every other year, if I remember right?
I think that's correct, yes.
And was it 2.5 million or something like that over a biennium? I don't remember. Maybe our fiscal staff could.
I'm hoping our fiscal staff can help us because I do not have that in front of me.
And Chair, while he's looking that up, you know, with a $100 million budget, we should be able to afford that.
I did notice in the governor's proposal that funding this study was not a part of it. So I think we'll have to keep working to find that.
Chair, we can go to other questions too while he's looking too.
Okay, members, any other questions? No pressure, Eric. No, well, Senator Lucero, you may ask a question. Go ahead. Okay.
I'm also happy to walk us through the rest of the core bill while we're waiting for information on this amendment.
Chair, I'm going to support the amendment. I don't think it's necessary for the vote, but I think it would be good for the committee to understand what has been happening every 2 years for a long time. So I would ask that we take the motion on the A5 and then just get updated when that information becomes available.
Okay. Well, with that, Senator Drahan moves the A5 amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed and say nay. The amendment is adopted. Senator Port, to your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I'll just walk you quickly through this. It's not a long bill. Section 1 amends the eligible recipients for grants and loans in the Minnesota tax credit contribution account. So projects that also receive funding under the Workforce Housing Development Program are not subject to those household income limits to help expand what we can do in greater Minnesota. Section 2 inserts a lived experience engagement exemption in the housing finance chapter. So as the agency is working on various policies and are having lived experience experts provide their expertise, they are sometimes paid a stipend or a small wage And we don't want that stipend or small wage to make them disqualified for SNAP and WIC and existing human services programs. We did hear that section of this bill this morning in HHS, and there were no amendments to it there. So that is that bill's jurisdiction. It just says that income doesn't count for eligibility for those programs. It still has regular tax implications, though. Section 3 makes technical changes to the use of proceeds for LAHA. Section 4 is technical changes to use the local housing aid section that allows tribal nations to retain unused funds in a tribal nation housing fund. So as we appropriate money to the tribal nations, if they have a formula to divide it evenly between all 11 tribes, but one tribe doesn't have a program or doesn't have the capabilities to put that money out, it doesn't go back to the general fund, it goes back to that tribal fund. And they decide how to split that out in other ways. Section 5 just modifies the reporting, and Section 6 repeals that emergency needs projection, which we have taken out of the bill for the moment. I do have MHFA here if there are questions for them. Mr. Kitzberger is happy to answer all of them. And also happy to take any other amendments.
All right, members, Senator Draham.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Port. I do have the A2. Chair Mohamed, if that's okay, I'd like to offer the A2.
Senator Draham moves the A2 amendment.
Okay.
Is that in our packets?
I think so. I tried to share it with the committee ahead of time.
Okay, it's in everybody's packet. Senator Draham, to your amendment.
Thank you. Members, this is the bill we heard a few weeks ago, Senate File 2434. We had a good debate on it. I just think it's a good governance bill. So I think it will help with transparency. I'm all about transparency, as Senator Mohamed hears all the time in Jobs Committee. So I just ask for the support on the A2, which is really Senate File 2434, rewritten to fit the bill. So.
Okay. Senator Port to the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Draham, thank you for continuing to have this discussion with us. I do think it's an important one. I wonder if we could get a response from the agency on their thoughts of this amendment.
Okay. We'll give it a second for the agency folks to maybe come up. Introduce yourself to the committee.
Chair Mohamed, members of the committee, my name is Ryan Baumtrug, Assistant Commissioner for Policy and Community Development in Minnesota Housing. Thanks for having us, and Senator Draham for the amendment. This is one we've had kind of continued conversations about throughout. I think the agency still is concerned about putting language proposed in the A2 into statute at this point, but would continue to work with Senator Draham and Chair Port and Chair Mohamed on, you know, what challenges we're seeing right now are some issues and maybe a better, more direct way to handle that as we move forward with future budgets.
All right. Senator Draham.
Thank you for coming up in the comments on behalf of the agency. I wonder if we could get an update from our nonpartisan staff on how much interest has been earned on the programs that we did last year. And I know it's a moving target, but it would be just for the discussion. If that's okay, Chair?
Yep. Eric?
Madam Chair, Senator Draham, so I have numbers on overall interest earned, so not particularly just to the appropriations from last year. but in fiscal year 2025, there was $57.17 million earned in interest according to their annual financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Senator Graham?
So thank you, Chair, and thank you for the numbers. You know, Senator Port, I just feel very strongly that we need to get these programs out the door. And we just had another bill on structuring and how things work. And I know the agency needs the resources from the mortgage side to live off and operate. I appreciate that. I really do. But I don't want to see a conflict within a state agency on funding programs to help people to get into homes. So I think this is just a good governance bill wrapped into an amendment. So you're the only agency that has this power to do this, and I do believe that it slowed down the program funding to get out. So that's my motivation behind it. So I would love for more discussion or a reason why we shouldn't do this from a governance standpoint. I know the agency uses its money to fund other programs, and I appreciate that. But when we set guidelines on where the money's supposed to go, I think appears to be a little bit of conflict of interest on getting that money out in a timely fashion. So that's the motivation behind the bill. Thank you.
Chair Port.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Draheim. I don't disagree with you, Senator Draheim. I think we have an evolving agency and the relationship between the agency and the legislature. It is very sincerely my hope that we are not going back to the days of $10, $15, $20 million for housing. I think it is clear across our state that it is time for a larger ongoing investment in housing, both production and also the ongoing services that are needed and rent supports. And I think as, you know, hopefully our shared advocacy for housing in this legislature over the last decade is shifting that paradigm here at the legislature. And I think that there is a future where we invest more as a state in housing than we have in the past. And I think in that space, it is critical that we understand, are able to see, are able to track, and that the ways that we do things work for those larger numbers in a way that is maybe different than it was in the past. And so it would be my request that we keep talking about this. Senator Draheim and Deputy Commissioner, I would really appreciate if we could withdraw the amendment today, but with a commitment to meet together over the next couple of weeks and find some additional transparency, understanding, and guardrails that help us to move forward together in that, you know, Senator Draheim, I think you and I share concerns about this. And so that would be my request.
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Senator Port. You know, I guess being on the Finance Committee, I will have another bite at the apple, if you will. So I will withdraw it today, but it's coming back. And what form, you know, that's, I guess, up to the three of us to work out. I'm happy to have any discussions on how to modify it a little bit if we need to. I just think it's good governance, period. And I think the public is begging for good governance and for us to work together. And, you know, with that, I'll withdraw the A2. But we might see it again in a week or so. So thank you.
I appreciate your advocacy on this, Senator Draheim.
Thank you. Senator Port, I have the A6 amendment, which is my Senate File 4400 that we just heard. Senator Port.
Thank you, Senator Mohamed. I appreciate you bringing this. We are trying to move forward some of these pieces. This does need to go to finance. We're sending it on its own to finance, but our entire bill will also likely make its way there, potentially. So I would like to add this in if folks are amenable so that we have it continuing to move both paths.
All right, members, any questions? With that, the A6 amendment is adopted. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposing say nay. It is adopted. Thank you, Madam Chair. Any other discussions to the bill, members? Senator Draheim.
Just for clarification, Chair, if I could. So the plan is, this is it? And we're going to send it to finance before you have a target? Or is it coming back? Just, if I could, Chair, just get the plan of where it goes.
Senator Port.
Thank you, Senator Mohamed. Thank you for the question, Senator Draheim. We will have an additional finance bill. This is policy, probably our most technical policy bill ever in this committee, and probably the smallest. The hope is, in addition to this, that we may add back in Senator Bolden's corporate homeownership bill, if that makes it out of finance, depending on or judiciary, excuse me, and potentially also the manufactured Bill of Rights, which I think is in commerce right now, and then has to go to judiciary as well. So if anything remains of those bills after they make it through that process, we will consider adding those back in as well. But we will bring a separate dollar bill.
Any other comments?
And I would like to note for the record that this does have to go to taxes, but Senator Putnam has agreed to present there.
Thank you, Senator Putnam. Senator Port, closing comments?
Members, this is... Oh.
Sorry, Senator Port. Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm just trying to be clear. Did I understand that correctly? There's like $57 million worth of interest. This would be on Senator Draheim's amendment. And right now, it just is being spent by the agency how they want, and you want more reporting on that. Is that correct?
Senator Draheim.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I guess what it boils down to, Senator, is that it's not partially, it's timing to me. You know, we heard from a lot of the nonprofits that were frustrated with the lack of funds leaving. We heard from the commissioner telling us that there was a liquidity problem at the agency while they're racking up interest, which from a business standpoint, I appreciate that it's in an interest-bearing account. I do. But it shouldn't be at the cost of Minnesotans waiting for housing.
Yeah.
So I think that my amendment, the underlying bill, will help neutralize that incentive for the agency to put that money to work for a long period of time. So I'm glad they're collecting interest. It'd be like us putting it in a CD, money market, something. Better return than a money market. But so I appreciate that. So it's not that they're not using our tax funds wisely, but we passed legislation and the governor signed it. It should be enacted. And I think there's a little bit of conflict of interest, how the system is set up now. And I think this is my idea to kind of separate that a little bit. And if there's a better idea, I'm all ears. But no one's reached out to me on how to do that. But that's my attempt. So thank you.
Senator Gruenhagen.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And I would just encourage Senator Port and the agency to work with Senator Draheim on that. You know, we've had so much fraud in the state government here and less transparency, and I think the more transparency we can provide a taxpayer and get the money out the door to actually help the homeowners, the better we would be. So I sincerely encourage you to work with Senator Draheim to get some type of amendment that brings a little bit more accountability to the agency, which we've seen to be a problem in other agencies. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Port, now to closing comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. I appreciate all of your work on this. I think we have a relatively technical policy bill in front of us this year that is probably not any big, huge sweeping changes, but that will help us work more effectively. And I think I would like to say a thank you to the agency for your continued willingness to work with us and have conversations with us and move us forward. And you are a unique agency in that we don't give the agency any money for admin. The only admin that the agency uses is that interest. We don't pay for FTEs like most agencies. So I do think we need, it's a unique relationship here between the legislature and the agency, and I do think we need to make sure that as it's growing, that we're doing so in a way that benefits the folks who need us to provide these services, build homes, and make sure that all Minnesotans have a safe and stable home, and the oversight that the legislature needs to be doing in all of these cases. And I appreciate the willingness for Senator Draheim to work with us on that, and also the agency. And really do appreciate this committee's willingness to work together and find ways that we can help make more people safe at home.
Thank you, Chair Port. Senator Port moves that Senate File 4394 as amended be recommended to pass and be referred to the Committee on Taxes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose? The motion prevails and your bill is on its way, Senator Port. And with that, members, there being no further business for today, this meeting is adjourned.
Go get it.